Everything you need to know about products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on CL 650.
Who's sorry now? Who's sorry now? Whose heart is
Well, thanks, Dwayne. We were trying to think of the appropriate song for this segment of the show, but what it really comes down to is you can't go back and fix things after they're done if you haven't insured properly. That's one of the messages I think that people need to take away from the show is make sure your insurance is up to date, make sure you're covered for those obligations that you have. And, when we talk about homeowner insurance, Gord, we talk about, homeowners, landlords, tenants, all these different relationships. Really what it comes down to is personal content, and if there's a claim that results from my strata lot, odds are I'm going to be responsible for the cost of the deductible and all these other expenses.
Yeah, everything. I mean, even if you have a tenant in there, you could get into where the tenant moves out and it says, I can't stay. I'm not paying rent.
Yep.
So, so you make sure your tenants have tenants insurance to cover that.
Yeah, there are just so many costs that get downloaded, but it's about, sharing the risk as well. You can't live in a strata and just necessarily expect everybody's going to pay for everything else that's on the go. It's the problem that we see in Bearland stratas where someone assumed that the insurance was covering our homes. Don't make any assumptions when it comes to insurance. Make sure that you actually have, documents that verify whether there is coverage and information in place.
Yeah, our members have told us that when there was a major loss to a strated building, as low as half of the unit owners would have coverage. And if you're looking at a major loss, like an earthquake or something like that, that means that your ability to get into a recovery phase has to wait for everybody to raise the money. It's not just the deductible. It's now the other aspects of for the people who are out of their homes and can't come up with the assessment for reconstruction, things like that. It's especially in an area here like the Lower Mainland with so many tall, slim buildings. Those are going to be particularly at risk in an earthquake situation. I think we saw after the New Zealand earthquakes and the media coverage showed that largely a lot of the buildings stayed standing. There were very few fatalities. The media reported that our building codes are similar, and I think there might have been a takeaway for a lot of people that said, hey, our buildings are going to stay up. We're not going to sustain a lot of damage. Look at Christchurch. The buildings are still standing up. The fact is that now, 3 and 4 years later, I think they're at something like, somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 buildings have been pulled down because they're just structurally unsafe.
Yes.
And so even if it's, the building codes, the seismic upgrading, all of those things are designed to get you out alive. After that, it comes the real job of recovery and rebuilding, and it's very likely, especially as I say, for these tall, slim buildings, they may need some, even if they're still standing, they may need to come down or need major reconstruction to be safe again.
Well, and the experts from the research projects indicate that every 300 to 400 years we have a major earthquake on our coast, and we're at 300 years, I believe.
Exactly, 1700. Yeah.
So we still got another 100 years to go.
Well, let's not take that opinion or that approach. We're at a situation where the risks are growing, right? There's an inevitability that there will be some risk, and people can certainly insure for this. They can insure their buildings, they can insure their personal risks and their liabilities. But Gord, when you're talking about earthquake deductibles, I think there's been a misconception in the industry also about what they mean, because we'll see an earthquake deductible, it says 10%. What does that mean?
It's a deductible. So what that means is it's 10% of the sum insured. So for example, if your building's appraised for replacement value of 10 million, we're insuring for 10 million. 10% deductible means it's 10% of 10 million, which means is $1 million deductible. a very common misconception is people think it's a co-insurance. So and I have a lot of, I would say over 50% of people I talk to when we talk about this topic, they'll say, oh, that means if I have $1 million in damage, I guess we just have to come up with 100,000, and the 900,000 the insurance company will look after. I said, no, it's not. It's a deductible. So you have to pay the first 10% of the sum insured. So take a look at the policy, calculate 10% of the sum insured. That's what you're responsible for. If the damage is below that amount, there's no claim.
And so, Trudy, when we look at the earthquake in Christchurch and you look at the reports, there was structural damage to buildings, there was infrastructure damage,
That's right.
there was glass wall, curtain wall issues
Yep.
with glass, the infrastructure of gas, of water, electrical systems, elevators,
Yep.
safety systems. Even if the building was still intact, it easily sustained 20, 30, or 40% damage to the building.
Yeah, and liquefaction. I think there's a sense that maybe only some of the lower areas like Richmond and Delta might be susceptible. In a recent report that was commissioned by the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and it's available online at ibc.ca, it includes maps of the high hazard areas, and I think people would be quite surprised to find that they go all the way up the Fraser Valley through Maple Ridge and whatnot as being
Wow.
liquefaction zones. And what they saw in Christchurch was that buildings sunk 3 feet. Homes were left with about a 12% angle, from one side to the other, and one side dipped down and the other, So, obviously, there are some issues there that render those buildings uninhabitable, and they would need to come down and be replaced.
So, Gord, we have a 10% earthquake deductible if we do, and our property is assessed for a replacement value of $10 million. That might be 40 units for $10 million. $1 million then gets assessed to the 40 units because the strata doesn't have the money in the bank. How do the strata units pay for the assessment?
Well, that's a good question. I think it'll be very difficult, unless the individual's got a lot of money or cash waiting in the bank. So likelihood is that, my guess is that if they have their own insurance, they can make a claim on their own insurance. If it's got proper coverage, most of those insurance would provide average range of about $5,000 to $25,000 coverage towards an earthquake deductible assessment. I believe higher limits are available, but you really, have to look at that. But
Right.
I think people that don't have insurance, that's one of the reasons that you do. Like some people say to me, well, I don't have a lot of contents. It's, I'm on a 20th floor. We got fob system. Don't need insurance.
Right.
I feel like, I can self-insure, and I kind of go, well, here's the things that you can't, because you're not going to have the funds. Likely you're not going to have $25,000 or $50,000 in cash to pay these deductibles, and if you don't pay it, you're not going to get your unit back, nor the building's going to get rebuilt.
Well, and that is one of the problems that they saw in New Zealand, where there was a very difficult time for the occupants of buildings paying deductibles, which prevented construction from starting on projects to do restoration of buildings.
There is so much that we can learn from the Christchurch experience, and just even some of the things that would bog down with in terms of, do we build, to recreate the historic flavor of the community, or do we build it in a modern manner, and things like that. While all of those things are going on, you have to remember that you potentially have a sizable portion of your strata owners, if they're uninsured, have no living out allowance, they're homeless. And, here in the Lower Mainland, that, we're talking about tens of thousands of,
Hundreds of thousands of
hundreds of
people.
thousands of people.
It's actually one of the biggest things that I'm always concerned about is where are people actually going to live?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the greater concerns. But but it's a vicious circle. If I don't have the $25,000 to $50,000 to pay for the deductible, our building doesn't get fixed. And if our building doesn't get fixed, I don't have a place to live. And if I don't have a place to live, I'm probably not going to have any credit available to be able to extend my mortgage or my credit to be able to get the money I need to be able to pay the deductible. It's like a full circle of problems that is going to make it impossible for people to get their buildings repaired.
Yeah, one thing that I think it might be interesting to see in the future as people start to understand their, the value and the role of their depreciation reports is that it would be probably very prudent for a strata corporation to work in the contingency around the continuity after a major event like that into their long-range planning, just as they are with, starting to fundraise for the plumbing and so forth. Whether we're going to see that in a large-scale manner, I don't know, but we can only hope, I suppose.
I think we're having a hard enough challenge to get people to realize they need to fund for the roof that's coming 5 years from now,
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
alone any of the contingencies. It's economics, right? It's housing affordability and the impact of affordability. This is Tony Givento. I'm your host of Key Pacific's Talk About Strata on 650 Sea Isle, and we'll be back with just a few moments after these messages to wrap up the show.
This is Experts on Call on Sea Isle 650.